With the first week of free agency now in the books, the New Orleans Saints signing of Justin Reid is their best move yet. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going through 10 superlatives around the New Orleans Saints' first week of free agency. I'll tell you why Chase Young is the best return, while we also dig into what we're going to wait to see, the worst move not made and the worst move made. We're also going to take a look at the cornerback surprise being the most underrated potential for the New Orleans Saints, along with most intriguing and most pragmatic decisions that the Saints have made so far this offseason. And to kick everything off, I'm going to tell you why Justin Reid is the team's best move, along with their best idea that they had that didn't work out, and the best move that they haven't made just yet. We'll dive into all of that in today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us this time, making us your first listen and being it every day, or here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can get $200 in bonus bets by winning your first $5 bet over at FanDuel.com. New Orleans Saints signing of Justin Reid is the best move that they've made so far in the early goings of free agency, but through the main portion of free agency, right? All the big contracts and big signings and big names usually happen throughout this first week. We are now a week and a day through the negotiating period beginning last Monday. And so I wanted to step back, take a look at the things that the Saints have done, what they haven't done, what they still need to do, what they shouldn't have done, and just kind of break it all down from the first week of free agency. And I want to start off with Justin Reid. 3-year, $31.5 million contract to get a new starting safety here in New Orleans that can help you kind of bridge the gap for that position from what they are now to what they will be in the future. I do think that at 28 years old, there's a chance that the Saints don't turn things around to be full-on competitors in time to really realize the massive potential of a Justin Reid. But if Justin Reid performs to his standard, then all of a sudden this team's defense already sees a boost if their run defense also gets better, and he'll help to take away some of the big explosive plays and things like that. New Orleans was one of the teams that not only struggled the most against the run, one of the worst teams against the run last year, but also gave up amongst the most 20-yard plays and amongst the most 40-yard plays as well. That's something that Justin Reid has a big impact on, because not only is Justin Reid a guy that can play down in the box and help you out in the run game, as well as the short passing game and things like that, but he does a very good job of making and forcing quarterbacks not to throw at him and not to throw deep when he's back in coverage, either in split safety looks, which the Saints played the 6th highest amount of split safety looks last year amongst the rest of the NFL, something that Justin Reid is very, very accustomed to and very comfortable doing, and also very effective in doing, forcing passes to, not go his way. So that's why I think that Justin Reid is the best move that the Saints have made so far. He helps on the defensive side when it comes to both of the places where they struggled, explosive plays and the run game. The run game, of course, isn't all about safety play, right? There's a lot more that has to be done there and a lot more that's got to go right for New Orleans when it comes to adjusting for that, with Brandin Staley now as a defensive coordinator, trying to figure out what his personnel is going to look like, all those other things. Justin Reid's going to help you, but he's definitely not going to be the end-all be-all for your run game. There's a lot of other moves that we're going to get to around that conversation. But at 3 years, $31.5 million, and the impact that a Justin Reid has the ability to potentially have for your team, and especially being a culture builder, being from the state of Louisiana, all these other things, I do think, and I don't know if you heard his press conference. If you haven't, you definitely should go and check it out. But he was excellent at the podium, and you could see all the leadership skills, the accountability, all those other things. One of the few guys to not stand at a podium for the New Orleans Saints in the past few years and not say that he's not a rah-rah guy. And so I really enjoyed not hearing that, and instead hearing a bit more about what his leadership style is like. So we'll be very interested to see both the benefit that he brings to the team, and if the Saints are able to turn things around fast enough to be able to not only receive that benefit, but make good on it during his 3-year contract. I think the best idea that the Saints had that didn't work out this offseason, so we're moving on to superlative number 2 here, but the best idea that they had that didn't work out, something they pursued that didn't work, was actually the signing of Cooper Kupp. They were in on the signing of Cooper Kupp, and they didn't end up making that signing, and you understand why, because he signed with the Seattle Seahawks somehow for $15 million a year, which is just, I mean, I guess we got to see what the rest of the contract structure actually looks like, but that was way more than I thought he was going to get on the open market. And so $15 million per year, Cooper Kupp gets over in Seattle. The Saints stayed away from it. I think it was a smart move for them to stay away from that. But I like the idea. I like the idea of going out and getting a veteran wide receiver. It's something that makes sense. I mean, you're watching Cam Jordan, for instance, almost on a daily basis now on Twitter, talking about adding Teteroa McMillan to this offense and what the offense would look like with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and Alvin Kamara and Teteroa McMillan and Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau. Like, he's thinking it all up. He's envisioning it. He's dreaming it all up for his offense. But I do think that another veteran wide receiver, and if possible, a more accomplished veteran wide receiver than those that are currently in the locker room. And I don't mean that with any offense to the guys that have 5+ years of experience, Dante Pettis and Cedric Wilson. Those guys have the ability to be leaders. I'm not trying to diminish what it is that they bring, but there is something about having that guy like a Keenan Allen, or having that guy like a Cooper Kupp, or even having that guy like a Brandin Cooks, who's still in the market along with Keenan Allen, to just come in and be kind of that veteran leader, veteran presence and stuff like that. I do think that there's value there, but at the same time, that's what the coaches are for, right? And Keith Williams, you got one of the better wide receiver coaches out there. And Kyle Valero, assistant wide receivers coach, also excellent. Like, you have what you need in terms of leadership and coaching and all those other things. But I do think that having that veteran presence, and I think we saw a little bit of that with Marquez Valdes-Scantling towards the end of the season, does have some value just in terms of the navigating tough situations and the having been there, done that-edness of veteran wide receivers and stuff like that. I do think that there's value there. So I like the idea behind it, even if we remove the Cooper Kupp name, the just going after a veteran wide receiver that has an elite trait that you can add to your team. What Cooper Kupp could have done out of the slot and as a physical receiver, close to the line of scrimmage, all those other kinds of things. I think that's a smart move. So I give the Saints a best idea, very good idea kind of badge on that one. And then finally for this one, I want to take a look at the best move that they have not made so far, because I think this move could still be made, but I like that they haven't re-signed Lucas Patrick just yet. This isn't really about Lucas Patrick. This is about the offensive line. The Saints have done a lot of run it back over on the offensive side, right? Not a lot of new names, right? Velus Jones Jr., kind of the only big new name. Will Clapp is a reunion, all that. But not a lot being done in terms of new acquisitions over the offensive side, which tells you that maybe the draft will be offense heavy, but we'll see. That could be the case. That might not be the case. But I do like the fact that the Saints haven't decided to just completely run it back on the offensive line, and instead are very clearly looking at other options when it comes to that situation. Lucas Patrick visited with the Seattle Seahawks yesterday, where he has some connections with John Benton, as well as Rick Dennison, and of course, offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak's over there. So I think that that's a natural landing spot for Lucas Patrick, but they also visited with Tevin Jenkins, who I would love to see the Saints end up potentially signing. So we'll see which way everything goes for Seattle there. But for New Orleans, I like that they haven't just decided to run it back on the offensive line, and instead have clearly been looking at other possibilities when it comes to, as they have not filled that position yet, right? The signing of Will Clapp, I think, gives you good depth, and it's a smart signing on a 1-year deal, all that other kind of stuff. But you're not signing Will Clapp and going, okay, there's your starter, right? You're still looking for that. But I like that the Saints haven't just said, okay, just re-sign Lucas Patrick and move on. The one place that you probably don't necessarily want to just completely run it back on offense is probably that offensive line. Add talent there. And so I like that they haven't re-signed and just kind of defaulted to Lucas Patrick, and instead are clearly waiting to see what could potentially come to fruition at left guard. Coming up next, I think that the most underrated move for New Orleans is in the defensive secondary, just like their best move is, but it starts with cornerback Isaac Yiadom. Let me tell you why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you everything you need to be able to get in on all of the action all tournament long, including new customers who can get $200 in bonus bets. All you got to do is win your first $5 bet over at FanDuel.com today, and then that's $200 that you can use on things like buzzer beaters and Cinderella stories, and even betting on who's going to cut down the net in each tournament. The men's tournament, Duke, the heavy favorite. The women's tournament, UConn, Paige Buckets, the heavy favorite. But maybe you still like those LSU Tigers and Flauget and all those of the plus 5,000 for the LSU Tigers over on the over with the women's national championship. So a ton to get in on over at FanDuel today. Head over to FanDuel.com and get started. They'll make sure that you have everything you need to make the most out of this NCAA tournament all tournament long. All right, family. I think the most underrated move the New Orleans Saints might have made was bringing back cornerback Isaac Yiadom. And this one's twofold for me. So we're going to go through most underrated move, most intriguing or interesting move, not necessarily negative, not necessarily positive, just kind of like, so this is kind of interesting. And then I'm going to go with my most pragmatic move, the one that like just kind of says like, hey, good use of asset, right? Like just a pragmatic move. So we're going to go through those three things. But I want to start off with my most underrated move, which I think will end up being Isaac Yiadom. And there's really, this one's kind of twofold, like I said. So it's the signing itself, and it's the pivot away from what they didn't do in the meanwhile. So let me start off with Isaac Yiadom. Isaac Yiadom is a guy that was with the Saints. It's another reunion. He's a guy that was with the Saints that spent time with them in 2022, coming in late, as well as in 2023, playing throughout most of that season, kind of as a special teamer, but then getting opportunities as a starter as there were, health issues with Marshawn Lattimore and Paul Debo, both of them missing time and things like that. And in the time that he spent playing for the New Orleans Saints and manning one of those outside corner positions, he ended up being amongst the top of the NFL in terms of pass breakups. And with a 30% forced incompletion rate, was number one in the NFL amongst qualifying cornerbacks. Those qualifications were simply 300 coverage snaps in a season. Not far behind him, I think ranking at number 6, or tied for 6, was Paul Debo, who had 22%. He was either 6th or 4th, I can't remember, but he was in the top 6. So you have both of those corners right there, right? And I think that there's kind of two truths to this. The first of which is that Isaac Yiadom may be a more talented corner than people give him credit for. The other thing is that Dennis Allen did a really good job of molding cornerbacks. I mean, you can say whatever you want about Dennis Allen as a head coach. I know I certainly have. But when you look at what he's done in terms of developing talent in the secondary, it's kind of his thing. It's kind of what he does very well. It's kind of one of the reasons why, like, I'm excited for Jalen Johnson over in Chicago, because I think Jalen Johnson's been one of my favorite corners for a long time since he came into the league. And I think that he should look good under Dennis Allen. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that is. But for Isaac Yiadom, like, bringing him back, this is a guy that's on a 3-year, $9 million deal that has some incentives that can get him up to a total of a $10.5 million deal. It's about $500,000 per year, basically, of incentives that he can get. So on a 3-year, $3 million base per year, you could have a starting corner. And your corner room, or I guess your cornerback usage on field, could be, Kool-Aid McKinstry on one side, Isaac Yiadom on the other side, on the outside as your boundary corners, and then moving Alontae Taylor back into the slot, back into that star position, and let Brandin Staley help to develop Alontae Taylor in that star position, which I would be very excited to see. It's one of the reasons why perimeter corner, boundary corner was so high on my list for the Saints this offseason, is because of the ripple effect of signing that guy on the outside and then being able to move Alontae Taylor back on the inside. So I guess really this is threefold. It's the signing of Yiadom, which I still think is a solid signing. At worst, you just got a really, really good core special teamer and a solid fourth corner, right? At worst, that's what you got. Then there's the ripple effect of improving a guy, or not improving, but like the ripple effect of putting a guy like Alontae Taylor back in a place where he started so strongly last year, and with a coach that might be able to get even more out of him in that position with a different role. The third thing is that the Saints pivoted to the Isaac Yiadom signing after not signing Travarius Ward, the former San Francisco 49ers corner. Before that, he was with the Kansas City Chiefs. Travarius Ward signed with the Indianapolis Colts for $20 million per year. This is a guy that's coming off of a year last year where he played 12 games, had no interceptions, and had 7 passes defense. Now, he led the NFL in 2023 with 23 passes defended, don't get me wrong, but just wasn't really the guy that felt like you should get $20 million coming off of his 2024 performance and stuff like that. And, for me, I think that the Isaac Yiadom signing was a smarter signing by New Orleans. So I think that it's an underrated one because you could have just gotten your starting corner for $3 million a year. I think it's a smart signing because you avoided paying another starting corner $20 million per year, and you might have just made Alontae Taylor a star. It's the star role. You get what I'm saying. You might have just made Alontae Taylor's career. You know what I mean? So like, I'm excited to see how this all works out. I don't think the Saints are done at corner. I think still like guys like Jahdae Barron in the first round, maybe Will Johnson in the first round, depending on the medicals. Medicals are a little scary when it comes to all that. Siobhan Revel in the second round. Any of these other corners, Benjamin Morrison, you can grab in the second round. Trey Amos, you can grab in the second round, who's kind of like Paulson Adebo all over again. Like there are these guys that you can find, and that's just in the first 2 rounds. There's more later. Noel Williams out of Cal, for instance. Like there are players that you can invest in that could potentially end up starting for you on the outside. Remember, Paulson Adebo was a week 1 starter, and he was a 3rd round pick that the Saints traded up to grab and everything. And so I genuinely think for New Orleans that like this move, the Isaac Yiadom move, could have the ripple effects there, but they might not be done at the position. So underrated move for me. Most intriguing move so far for me is Velus Jones Jr. And like I said, not necessarily negative, not necessarily positive when I'm talking about this. And again, this isn't an evaluation of Velus Jones Jr. It's just like, where does he fit? The Saints put out a press release to local media yesterday, and the press release that we received had Velus Jones Jr. referred to as a running back, not a wide receiver. He was a wide receiver at Tennessee. He was drafted as a wide receiver in the 3rd round, that I can't remember which draft it was. But anyway, when he entered the league with the Chicago Bears, I want to say like 2021, but I'm afraid I'll sound like an idiot. But he's got more career carries, 20, than he has career catches, 12. Has more career rushing yards, 165, than he has career receiving yards, 135. And has a touchdown in each of those categories, a rushing touchdown and a receiving touchdown. And so for the Saints, like they're bringing him in as a running back, 6 foot, 200 plus pounds. Like that's pretty solid build for more like 5'11", but like pretty solid build for a running back. And so this could be really interesting to see. Now, the thing that you have to watch out for is, I believe I want to make sure I get these numbers right. 4 fumbles, 3 fumbles over the course of his years. And then I think it's 4 muffed either punts or kick fields, right? They're trying to field returns. So 2 things to watch out for because he's also kind of a return specialist. But just following that Cordero Patterson thought process could be really interesting. I think some people typically discuss a little bit about the like the Deebo Samuel comparison. I'm gonna hold off on that one. But in terms of a role, it'll be really interesting to see what Velus Jones Jr.'s role could potentially be should he make the roster. To me, the most pragmatic move was trading a 7th round pick for Davon Godchaux, and you get a new defensive tackle that can play anywhere from 0 tech as a nose tackle all the way out to 5 tech over the offensive tackle as a run stopper, 3-4 defensive end, and you get that for a $5 million cap hit. And what'd you trade? You traded next year's 7th round pick. I think it's a pragmatic use of assets. And I think that Davon Godchaux, somebody as a standard bearer and somebody to come and give addition by addition to this defensive line, which I thought was going to see a lot more change than it has. That is a pragmatic move. I like that move by New Orleans a lot. All right, coming up next, we're going to take a look at why Chase Young is the best and biggest return. I'll tell you what move we're going to wait and see when it comes to evaluations. And we're going to get to some of the worst things that have or have not happened for New Orleans. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
get it, Who Dat Nation. The re-signing of Chase Young, I think, is the best return for the New Orleans Saints this off season. Getting him back on a 3-year, $51 million total deal when he would have cost you $9 million walking out of the door. You bring in a cap hit of just over $6 million here in 2025. So actually saved around $2.2-ish million. Just excellent. And you're giving Brandin Staley a player that fits exactly what it is that is going to be successful in his system. And that is a speedy, tenacious, stand-up pass rusher with great athleticism. Played all 17 games last year. Is healthy going into the offseason, which I think is kind of a new endeavor from Chase based on what he explained to us when we spoke to him last week. And the investment that he has made in his body to stay healthy, the investment that he's made in his game, continuing to work with guys like Cam Jordan, I haven't heard any of the, oh, Chase Young's lazy and he's taking snaps off and blah, blah, blah. He was playing for a 5-win team last year. 5-win team. 73 total pressures according to Next Gen Stats. One of the best in the NFL when it came to generating those pressures. As we've consistently said, the biggest thing has to be the 5.5 sacks. Can you boost that number? Can you generate the sacks to make the contract worth it? All those other things to meet the contract value, all that. I think it's possible because I think you're going to play him a little bit more to his strength as a stand-up outside guy, having 3 on the defensive line in between the offensive tackles, taking up some of those blockers, giving him some one-on-one situations, allowing him to be able to win with bend around the edge, run the arc, all those other things, and maybe even have a complementary pass rusher on the other side that's rushing at the same time. I think all that helps to really, I don't want to say supercharge Chase Young, because I think it's an unfair expectation, but supercharge Chase Young. And so I think that it's a worthwhile investment keeping Chase Young around. I wasn't sure that the Saints were going to do it, but I think with this system, like if it was Dennis Allen coming back and it was still that defensive system, or let's say some crazy world where Dennis Allen was all of a sudden the defensive coordinator again, it would make no sense. It would make no sense to me because that's just not what that system utilized, right? Like that was one of the reasons why I said the Saints wouldn't sign Chase Young last season. I was wrong. But that they wouldn't sign Chase Young last season because if they did, they wouldn't use him the way that he should be used because of what the system dictates. And now the system actually dictates something that, like last year, I would have gone, yeah, perfect fit. And so I'm saying good fit now. The wait and see move of the year so far, or of the week. It's only been a week. But the wait and see move for me so far is Juwan Johnson. 3 years, $30.75 million with incentives up to $35.5 million. Juwan Johnson was really honest in his conversation with us, with the media yesterday afternoon. And I really appreciated that because, look, Juwan's contract extension is a contract extension that people have not been very kind about, right? People have called the contract a bad contract. People have called the decision to retain him at all a bad decision, all those other things. Now, it is interesting that he had a market, right? He had Sean Payton wanted him back over in Denver, which we had heard well before from guys like Tony Pauline and others from the Combine. I had heard a little bit of that during the Combine as well. The Seattle Seahawks, of course, naturally, like they're just trying to rebuild their Saints roster over there as best as they can. And so it's not like the Saints were the only ones that wanted him. But what Juwan Johnson was honest about that I appreciated in his time with us yesterday was that like he tends to come on late in seasons. And he wants to fix that. He wants to change that. Now, I didn't get a chance to ask, how do you go about changing that? Which feels kind of like a dumb question. Like I probably would have been an idiot for asking that question anyway. But I mean, you look at what he's done over the course of the past few years. And yeah, like the majority of the biggest things and biggest games that he had all come on towards the end of a season. He only had 3 games last year where he had more than 50 receiving yards. And the first one was week 13, where he had exactly 50 receiving yards. And then the last 2 were week 16 or game 16 and game 17, in which he had 66 receiving yards on 6 receptions and 80 receiving yards on 6 receptions to close out the season. So if he can start, but that follows games like 26 yards on 2 receptions in week 1. Didn't have anything going in terms of Dallas and Philly, but did take snaps. Yeah, he did take snaps. So no receptions, no targets in those 2 games. 2 catches for 13 yards, 5 catches for 31 yards, so on and so forth, right? So that's like the early start of his season within the first 5 weeks. But then you see where where everything kind of clicks later on in the season. And we said that about him in 2022 as well, going into my apologies. In 2023, going into 2024, that you could see all the momentum towards the end of the season. Like a bunch of his receptions and receiving yards and receiving touchdowns all came towards the end of the season. Now he's got momentum going into 2024. Now he's got to put that momentum together from 2024 to 2025. And I think he knows that, right? He talks about how he, called Kellen Moore late when the contract offer was on the table and said, man, just what do you want me back for? You know what I mean? Like, how do you want to use it? What do you want to? And he had like a 15, 20-minute conversation that kind of set everything up in terms of expectations and what. And again, according to Juwan, it wasn't really about the role that brought him back. It was the fact that Kellen Moore picked up. It was the fact that Kellen Moore talked to him. It was the fact that Kellen Moore treated him like a valued member of the team, all those other things. And so it's interesting because what's the opposite and where was the opposite experienced, right? And so why, the reason why that was important, I think tells you something about where this team used to be. And so I think it's a wait and see situation. I think Juwan Johnson is a very talented player. I think you see that. The issue is that not the issue, but the challenge for him has been that typically we haven't seen it until the end of a season. He would like to change that. So I'm going to go wait and see on this one and see. A 3-year, $30 million contract's not really that far outside of what you get from a tight end at this level in terms of his level of production. 50 receptions last year, career high, 548 receiving yards, career high. But can he exceed that? Can he exceed that? And one of the things that he said was that once there's going to be a moment where it all clicks, and once it clicks, it's going to be scary. Ideally for him, that click happens like we see it, right? In training camp and in practices and all those other things, that click happens early on in week 1 or early on in the season. Because I'll tell you, we see it during training camp, practices, all the other stuff. The hope is that the click happens in these games for him, right? Like he wants this just as badly as anybody else does. Finally, I want to go into the worst move not made as well as the worst move made. And I think that the worst move not made is that the Saints still don't have a starting left guard. But the market hasn't super dried up either. Like there's still guys they can go after if they want to go after the 1-year veteran like a Brandin or if they want to go after a young guy like a Tevin Jenkins. Like those guys are still on the market. So we'll see where things go. But missing out on Mekhi Becton has an impact. Were they even in on Mekhi Becton? Were they even interested? We don't know. But they didn't sign him. He ends up in Los Angeles on a pretty easy deal. 2 years, $20 million. Like pretty achievable deal. Now, that might have just been that he wanted to go to LA. He wanted to play with Harbaugh. He wanted to be on the West Coast. Whatever. Like there's more things in free agency than just the dollar signs, the dollar dues. And everything's a two-way conversation. It's not just, oh, well, I can't believe the team didn't pay him that. Well, maybe he didn't want the team to pay him that. It's simple, right? But left guard is something the Saints have got to take care of. And ideally, they take care of here in free agency as opposed to waiting until the draft for it. And then the worst move made, I think, is just running back the defensive line. I thought that there was going to be a lot more turnover on the defensive line. I'm really surprised. I understood the reworking and the contract extension for Nathan Shepard because you were able to knock some of the money down. I also knew that they really liked him. But I was surprised to see so many players brought back on that defensive line. And really the only departures are what? Peyton Turner and Tano Passanio. That's kind of it. You know what I mean? And so I was a little bit surprised by that. I thought that we might see after the run defense issue, after the lack of ability to sack the quarterback, all those other things, that maybe you would start to see talent changes on the defensive line. We'll see. But what this effectively says is that the Saints coaching staff believes they can do better with the personnel that they have by simply adding to that personnel a little bit. Davon Godchaux, Jonah Williams, right? Like they've added some of these players. They clearly feel that they can do more with what they have, and then maybe something happens in the draft. So we'll see. But that's the one that has been the biggest surprise to me so far. I'm very surprised by them running it back with effectively the same defensive line. Not enough change on that defensive line. But we'll see. Maybe that happens in 2026. We don't know. All right. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, everything you need to know about your New Orleans Saints, biggest moves, all that. We got a couple other players that we'll be visiting with over the course of the next couple of days. So I'll bring you some takeaways from all of that as well. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.